Now, what you want to avoid here is a move below 1330 this week. That would likely add pressure, and I'd say, very potentially a 1,000 test or even lower would come with that. We're above the 200 SMA on the weekly. That's a positive. We tried to close over the 10 EMA, this blue line, on the weekly, but we couldn't. We did, and then we're not holding right now. So now I have a problem. Until, let's just go straight to the BTC coverage here. Last time I was on here, I discussed the possibility of a rotation up that never happened. Therefore, we had no longs, and we dropped from that 32,000 area down below 20,000 and below 18,000 on the BTC USD. So as I look at the charts right now, I really don't see a tradable bottom per se. There was an opportunity maybe to buy some down in here around that 17, 18,000 area, and I'll show you why. But otherwise, we haven't had a lot of constructive action. It seems like a big move, and it is on a percentage basis, but in a bigger scheme of things, this drop is still overwhelming, and we're going to need longer term time frames to show us the way before we can get too bullish. So looking at the daily, as you can see, this downward sloping 50 SMA is providing resistance. The weekly bear flag, which is evident on many of the cryptos that I follow, is really coming into play here as that 10 EMA holds it down. When I have this much air below the 10 EMA and all these candles, and what I mean by air, the candles not coming back up and touching it, when I have all this air, that's a sign of weakness. And to me, this is like a bear flag, bear pennant at this time. I'd love to get bullish. I want to get bullish, and I want to add more to my little tiny buy around 18,000, but without proof, I'm going to be risking zero, as in a break-even stop. And the only way I'll add is if we get back over that 24,300 in here and regain this downward sloping 10 EMA on a daily close basis. Moving on to the monthly chart. Last time we discussed that we wanted to see back over this 40,023 area. That didn't happen. Now, what we need to see is back over this 32,000 area. One of the issues I have with that is there's only a few days left in this monthly candle currently, and that's likely not going to happen. The other issue I have is the 10 EMA is downward sloping, and even if we get over that, there's not a lot of room between this high and that 10 EMA. And it doesn't provide me with the best risk-reward setup with my type of trading. So what I'd rather do now is, since we're only a few days away until August 1st and we get a new monthly candle, I'd like to wait till we see that 24,277 area taken out, this high in here. If we do that, then we can get away with a tighter stop, and our risk-reward scenario will give us room at least to that 31, 32 area, if not all the way to that 34, 35,000 area. And it'll provide us, with a setup that makes sense rather than chasing it if we were to zip up and clear over that 32,000 in the next few days, which is, of course, highly unlikely. And based on this weekly bear flag, I don't see it happening in the next few days. Otherwise, I'd say at this juncture, you can't be holding and hoping. If you're up here and you didn't get out on this monthly rotation down like we discussed last video, then you got to kind of wait and see how things develop. And if it's going to develop to the upside, you're going to have plenty of time. There's no reason to have FOMO. Let's point out that the volume was extremely high this candle so far, and therefore this is of interest to me. When I have a lot of volume on a potential bottoming candle, I respect it a lot more than I would if it was one of these candles. So that 24,277 area up in here holds more weight, and therefore I'd be more interested in buying along there.
Because of the relative change in volume.
Yes. So when you have a potential low, a lot of times, like in here, you'll see this volume was very high on this candle and the whole trend's changed. So it's not foolproof. It's not 100% something that you can hang your hat on, but it's something to be noted along with all the other weight of evidence that we build by using a multi-time frame type analysis.
I should say, when you mentioned timeframes, we're filming here on Tuesday, July 26, 2022, just to give our audience a sense of context of what we're looking at.
Yes. And with that noted, and knowing that there's only 5 more days till the end of July, that monthly candle is going to come into play very soon here. And I'd like to really pay attention to that 24,300-ish. Let's round it off for the sake of making it simple, as a potential rotation to the upside. Okay, the next chart I would like to move on to is the ETH USD. And it's very similar in nature to the BTC. Not a lot of difference. The daily chart is somewhat constructive because it kind of holds above this 50 SMA, whereas the BTC does not. And the fact of the matter is that it had a bigger pop off the lows. Let's move on to the weekly. You'll see that it got clearly over that 10 EMA on the weekly, whereas BTC hasn't not even tagged it yet. Now, what you want to avoid here is a move below 1330 this week. That would likely add pressure, and I'd say, very potentially a 1,000 test or even lower would come with that. We're above the 200 SMA on the weekly. That's a positive. We tried to close over the 10 EMA, this blue line, on the weekly, but we couldn't. We did, and then we're not holding right now. So now I have a problem until I get a monthly up. And I mentioned last review and video that I didn't have a position, and I still don't. I probably regret not buying around 900, but I did not. So what I'd rather do here is wait for some kind of monthly rotation, because what I see is that if I can use a risk that's tight to the price I'm entering, I feel better. Whereas if I did it last month, I had no price for reference. Likely the only price I had for reference would have been way down here in the 60 to 100 area. And I wasn't going to risk from 800 to that on a percentage basis. Right now, next month, if we are buyers over that 1665 area, which is this month's high, then I can risk this month's lows, which is 1,000, a much smaller percentage, a big move nonetheless, but a much smaller percentage. So 2 things I'm watching, and I'll keep this very short. We got to reclaim that 10 EMA on the weekly and close above it on a daily basis. That'll get me interested on a partial long, and then a monthly up back over that 1665 in August.
Dean, can you talk in a relatively general way about how you think about when it's time to get involved and when it's time to just sit out with a bat on your shoulder and wait for your pitch?
As far as I'm concerned, the best way to think about that, generally speaking, is to have a size versus reward and risk scenario set up. And I think that's really what it comes down to every single time you put on a trade. So in my opinion, I think that if you're buying something based on your system, in this case, my system would be that we think the Ethereum just had an ABC correction and potentially could be setting up for another move off of prior support, which is right around that 1,000 area all the way to 1,300. And we're going to move higher. But you have to have a stop. So what my thinking is, if you don't have a low that spikes or a volume low or a spot that you think is support, then why be involved in something when you're just throwing the dice or rolling the dice and throwing darts? That's kind of how I look at it. So it's really a numbers game in the end. There's no point in me buying something when I don't have a proper stop. And that's the first thing I look at on every trade is a stop. Reward will come later. You can put in your extensions, your parameters, your targets, etc. But if you don't have a proper R&R, risk reward scenario, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1 or higher even, then there's no point in putting it on. And that's how I stay away from trades that don't set up the way I like to see them.
Hey visionaries, thank you for tuning in. For more free crypto content like this, head over to realvision.com/crypto. You'll get early access to the most brilliant minds in the space to cut through the noise, get in-depth analysis, and get you ahead of the curve with unbiased insights.